Hello and welcome to Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, where we share inspiring stories on a wide range of cultural and social issues worldwide. We also feature exclusive interviews and have creative contemporaries who are shaping culture in art, music, business, fashion, and even the food industry join us. So stay tuned because you never know who we'll have on the show. I'm the host and creator Folasade Ologundudu, and thanks for listening. This first season, we're highlighting artists, curators, and art professionals from across the globe as we explore the African diaspora. We're also joined by the allies and supporters who seek to empower creatives of color throughout the world. We speak on issues of identity, love, spirituality, heritage, craft, and what it means to be a Black artist today, and all of the things that come with being a creative professional in the art industry. We share thoughts on life, work, business, and current events. No idea is too mundane, and no topic is off limits. Each episode, like each guest, is truly unique. Join us as we continue the journey of sharing empowering and inspiring stories. Meet our next guest, Dexter Wimberly, the art professional, founder of Art World Conference, and creator of the Hayama Artist Residency in Japan, joined me in conversation to discuss his entrepreneurial spirit, how he got into the art world unexpectedly, I might add, and why having the right team around you is critical to success in life and in business. Let's go! So far on this season, the majority of my guests have been artists. But as you know, there are countless people working in front and behind the scenes in the art world, making things happen every day. They are the writers who tell stories and shape narrative. They are the educators who influence how we learn about and discover art. Some work in marketing communications and brand partnerships, creating experiences in the form of events and live discussions, while others focus on workshops and educational programs. From the gallery owners and curators to the entrepreneurs across different parts of the industry, these are the people who are working as creative, innovative agents of change. They are today's thought leaders and tomorrow's vision for a brighter world, empowering others in their fearlessness and dedication. Let's get started on this episode with Dexter Wimberly. What were some of the early experiences in your life that led you towards a career in the arts and ultimately to where you are now professionally?
I think back, as far back as grade school, I was always interested in finding creative ways to express myself, but I never ever considered the path of an artist. My personal desire to be creative was really more about working through questions I had about the world than it was about me ever thinking that I would have some visual language that I would develop and be able to sort of interact with the world that way. As I got older and started thinking about what I wanted to do career-wise, the art world was something that was very, very far away from me. It wasn't something that I planned to get involved with in any way, shape, form, or fashion. My first inclination for some sort of career was to potentially become a lawyer. And this is, goes back to high school, thinking about that. When I got out of high school, the idea of becoming a lawyer started to lose its appeal to me, and probably because it wasn't really my idea. I think it was the idea that people were telling me that would be a good career path for me, maybe because they thought, I'm good at expressing myself. So maybe a career in the legal field would make some sense. But I was very passionate about communication and finding ways to express complicated ideas with words. And as a result of that, like a lot of young people, I got interested in like music and poetry and all those things. And again, none of those passions were really career choices. It wasn't until I got into college that it became clear to me that I wanted to start my own business. My first company that I started, I was 21, 22 years old, was a public relations and advertising agency in New York City. And I ran that company along with a friend and business partner of mine. I ran that company for over a decade, like 13 years. In the midst of running that company, I became interested in the art world. I started meeting artists. I started interacting with other creative people and realizing there was this whole world out there that I had an interest in, but had not in any way interacted with. And so the transition from being someone who runs a PR and advertising agency into someone who's a curator was a very strange one. It wasn't a sort of a linear path. I started meeting creative people, talking to them about their passions, trying to understand what were the roadblocks they were experiencing with their careers. Why was someone who, educated as a painter or sculptor or any other, discipline in the arts, why was someone with that kind of education not pursuing that dream? That was fascinating to me. And I realized a lot of that had to do with them not having access to information in terms of the business side of the art world, in terms of the things that have nothing to do with what they're putting on a canvas or what they're creating, but really has to do with how they position themselves. And so I started talking to artists about these challenges and trying to figure out ways that I could help them. And I started curating shows simply as a means of helping artists get visibility, helping them overcome the career obstacles they had. And then it kind of took on a life of its own. And before I knew it, I was completely out of the advertising and PR world and 100% in the art world as an independent curator.
And how long have you been an independent curator?
I've been an independent curator, I mean, at the very least 12 years. Yeah, it's been about 12 years in total.
What do you like most about your work, and what brings you the most joy and fulfillment in what you're doing today?
A long time ago, I decided that I wasn't going to do things that I didn't find exciting or interesting or things that I wasn't passionate about. And I know that sounds like a bit of a luxury, but it's really not. The day-to-day experience that I have being an entrepreneur, a curator, I'm also a senior critic at New York Academy of Art, which is a fairly recent thing. But my day-to-day is filled with challenges that I've created for myself, goals that I've set for myself that I want to achieve. It's all very fulfilling to me because I'm not living out someone else's plan. I would say, with very little exception, anything that I'm working on is something that I want to be doing. And so I find it all very fulfilling, and but not without its challenges. Helping people achieve their goals is probably the single most fulfilling aspect of my life. I often say that as a curator, you could conceptualize things on your own. You can't really do anything on your own. Everything is a collaboration in some shape, form, or fashion, whether it's with artists or with an institution or with the gallery or you name it, or other curators, in fact. So it's all very, very rewarding.
I've been lucky enough to interview some amazing artists so far, but I'm really interested on getting voices from the other side of the industry. Can you talk a little bit about the business side of the art world and how you work to impact and facilitate change in the art industry as the founder of Art World Conference, a business and financial literacy conference for visual artists?
Art World Conference was really the culmination of a lot of different objectives that I've had in the past 10 years as an independent curator. So as I mentioned, I had spent quite a bit of time talking with artists one-on-one and helping artists one-on-one achieve their goals. I knew that there's just like a limit to what I could, as one individual, actually do. So I wanted to create a platform that would amplify this objective that I had to empower artists with financial information and marketing and business skills. When I think about where the art world is right now and how it's been, at least my time working in it, I think it's still reflective of a very traditional hierarchy where the patrons, collectors, the wealthy people have, disproportionate impact on what is seen as important or valuable. For me, Art World Conference has always been about changing that dynamic and giving the individual artists the tools they need to make better decisions about their career. We've been, doing the conference for the past year and a half. We've had an in-person conference in New York last April, an in-person conference in LA this past February. We had plans for other in-person conferences, but as you well know, with the pandemic, we've had to change our business to, primarily an online model. And we have our first fully online conference taking place October 16th through 17th of 2020.
Isn't that so exciting? Even though the world has changed so much and things are very uncertain now, isn't there still a great excitement around all of those things that you're putting together?
Yeah, I've never lost enthusiasm for it. Back in March, when it was becoming clear that we were going into an entirely unexpected and uncharted phase, not only for my business, Art World Conference, and for the projects I was working on as an independent curator, but really, obviously, the world was going through this uncharted phase. It just so happened that our annual trip this year was pretty much March 1st, and we thought we'd be in Japan for about 4 weeks or so and come back home. Turns out we were unable to leave because all of the flights that we had booked on United were canceled and then canceled again and then canceled again. And so we found ourselves in Japan for 3 months, which, it was a wonderful experience, but certainly unexpected and not without a tremendous amount of anxiety, because we did not leave thinking we'd be there that long. But I still do believe that this is a fantastic time, And when I say that, I don't mean that in the context of people who've been affected by the virus and have gotten sick or certainly have died or lost loved ones. I just mean that we're living through a time that if we are open-minded about it, we should see that it is rife with opportunities as much as it is rife with obstacles.
Yes. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that experience of being in Japan while watching all of the events unfold in America. What was it like for you to watch how things were unfolding in the U.S., particularly with regards to racism, inequality, and police brutality?
Well, while I can certainly say that I was incensed and angered about so many of the things that were happening, if I'm going to be completely frank, the life I've lived, the things I've experienced, none of that was news to me. I'm from Brooklyn, born and raised in the 70s and 80s. I've lived through police brutality. I've witnessed it. I've been harassed by the police. I know people who've been killed by the police. I know people who have been harassed by the police. That shock that so many people were sort of grappling with, sort of like, oh my God, I can't believe sort of reaction, was not my reaction, because my entire life I've known that. My entire life I've seen that. So I was pleased to see so many people finally get the message that things need to change, and they need to change on a systemic level. And yes, I was upset about it, but not for a moment did I feel any sense of, oh my God, I can't believe. I've known that.
You talked about being from Brooklyn and growing up in Brooklyn in the 70s. Like, where did you grow up? And how would you say your upbringing has informed the way you view the world? Not also as, as a professional or a thought leader, but also as a man, and specifically as a Black man in America.
Well, I was born and raised in Bed-Stuy, and so my Brooklyn experience is the Brooklyn that, the folkloric Brooklyn of early hip hop.
Yeah.
And the block parties and the ice cream man coming down the street and the and the jams in the park and the Brooklyn that people sort of like mythologize about with Biggie Smalls and all of that, that was my reality of like Brooklyn. But it was also a place filled with family and filled with hope and filled with, it was like basically the swinging of the pendulum. I've experienced poverty personally. I've experienced, a great deal of success personally. All of that happened while Brooklyn was home for me. Even though I don't live there any longer, I am a reflection of Brooklyn. And as an African American or Black man born and raised in the borough, I hope that I am living up to the standard of the potential of the place. It's a place just like any other place, just filled with people trying to achieve whatever their version of success is. And I just feel deeply connected to it. I don't think I would be the person I am if I was born anywhere else. And I mean that sincerely. I think that the challenges that I experienced growing up in Brooklyn, the things I saw, the crime I saw, the sometimes despair I saw, really made me understand things about the world that I might not understand in another context. Also, it's about proximity. The thing about it is that a lot of people are flocking to Brooklyn now because it's sort of the place to be. Well, if you can afford to be there now, I mean, certainly it's much more expensive than it was in the 80s and 90s. But the thing about Brooklyn is like proximity. Because of Brooklyn's proximity to Manhattan, there was always this sort of like visual cue of what you could aspire to right across the bridge, right across the water. I grew up in a time when going into Manhattan was an event. It was like, where are you going? I'm going into the city. Like, wow, you're going to the city. Like, it was an event, And that's a funny thing to think about, right? Like, just that kind of like big change, how the city has changed so much. And I love Brooklyn, and by extension, I love New York. I am deeply, deeply in love with New York City.
Even today.
I think that New York, as far as cities go, I mean, I'm incredibly biased because I'm a New Yorker. I would never say it's the best city in the world or the greatest place on earth. I don't really get into making those kinds of statements. But for me, just thinking about it from my own perspective and my own experience, and also having the ability to compare it to other places. I mean, I think that's also the other thing. I've been fortunate enough to travel a lot. And so I don't say the things that I say about New York through like a narrow view. I know what other places are like, and I think that New York has this sort of complexity to its history and its diversity, despite its issues, even along racial lines, that you don't see in too many other places. And I think that the city still has a lot of potential. It's gotten way out of hand in terms of how unaffordable it is for younger working class people. But I think as far as like places go, I still love it deeply.
Yes, absolutely. I often go through this love-hate relationship with New York. And I'm a New York native, a fellow Brooklynite. I grew up in Park Slope and I was born in Kings County. And even though I go through these periods where sometimes I'm completely frustrated with the city and the only thing I want to do is pack my bag and leave as fast as I can, I also cherish so many of the things that I grew up with that as a young girl I took for granted. It wasn't until I was older and I got out into the world and I began to understand race and class and money and socioeconomic status that I recognized how lucky and how privileged I was to have grown up in a neighborhood and on a street specifically that was incredibly diverse. From a very young age, I was always around people who looked different than me, people who spoke different languages at home, people who ate different kinds of food. My father is an immigrant and comes from West Africa. Many of the people that I lived with and befriended as a young girl also came from immigrant communities and were part of the fabric of not only my neighborhood, but of, the symbolism of American life, that you can come from anywhere in the world and build a life here. But it was such a surprise and such a shock to grow up, leave the comfort of my home and my neighborhood and discover that the world was so different than the small microcosm that I had become so used to and so accustomed to. And so I'm so happy that you shared with me your experience of what Brooklyn means to you, how it shaped you, how it created you to be the man that you are today. So much of what we go through in life and so much of how we develop has a deep impact. We are so much affected by where we come from. And I think New York will always continuously hold that special place in my life because it's the city that birthed me. And no matter where I go, I'll always, somehow stay very much connected to that centerpiece and that sort of rooting and foundation of, this is the neighborhood that I grew up in. This is the kind of environment that I was in as a young girl. And it has shaped much of the way I view the world. And it's also why diversity is so important to me. And being around people who are different for me is a strength. I find it to be something to just be inspired and empowered by. So I'm just so happy that you shared with me those details of your experience growing up as a young man in Brooklyn.
Yeah, when I was in elementary school, I lived on Hancock and through Bed-Stuy. We actually moved a lot. I don't really have a lot of opportunities to talk about like my family life when I was really young, but we lived in Brooklyn during a time when landlords were notorious about not giving you heat during the winter, and so my mother, having young children, couldn't be in apartments that would be basically the same temperature outside inside as it was outside. So there were years where we would move twice in 1 year. But when I was in elementary school living on Hancock and Bed-Stuy, my uncle owned an ice cream parlor on Tompkins, and I grew up seeing people be entrepreneurial. I never had a fear of risk, and I think that's what sort of like made it possible for me to make these big changes in my life over time, is that I realized that there's no getting around risk. The idea that you're going to somehow get rid of the risk because you have a PhD is kind of a foolish one. Risk is just built into the program. The question is, how much are you willing to risk? How hard are you willing to work? And how dedicated are you to collaborating with people who have similar sensibilities, similar goals? Because you can't do it alone. If you can build a team, there's almost nothing you can't accomplish.
But that team is so important, right?
Oh, it's critical. I mean, yes, it's absolutely critical.
Right. I want to go back a little bit and talk about Japan. I read that through your love of Japan and your relationship to the country, through your wife, who is also Japanese, and the ways in which the city captivated your imagination, that it has been a place where you found great peace and solace. Can you speak a little bit more about the deep, long-lasting impact Japan has had on your life?
Sure. So, little known fact is that when I was 14 years old, still in middle school, I entered into this like citywide competition in New York. As early as 14 years old, I was interested in visiting Japan. It was just a place that struck me as, what's the word I want to say? It was as far removed from anything I had ever experienced that I could imagine. It was almost like the flip side of my life. And that was very intriguing to me. And so I always sort of like held this seed of an idea that I would go to Japan one day. And so fast forward from 14 years old, which is kind of weird when I put it in this perspective, because when you're 14, you feel like you're just like literally you are a kid, because you are. But the funny thing is, it was only 7 years later that I would start my first company, which is sort of strange when I think about it in that perspective, because it just seems so weird. When I started my PR and advertising agency, one of the first clients we had happened to be a Japanese-based distribution company that was interested in like American fashion. That reignited that idea in my mind, that spark in my mind. And so one thing led to the other, and I was able to take my first trip to Japan in 1998. And so at that time, I'm 25 years old, first trip to Japan. I went again in 99, and it was just mind-blowing experience, just like mind-blowing experience. There's a reason why you have all the cliches about people going to Japan and seeing the world differently. There's a certain level of history that is adhered to, but then they are so clear on modernity and how to be efficient with technology, and also very so dedicated and going deep on art and style. And so for me, that was just I was just all in. I didn't actually meet my wife until 2000 and like 10. So it's a long, it's kind of a 2010, 2011. That's like a long time later, right? My wife and I now with our children, we go to Japan every year to visit her parents and extended family that has now become my extended family. So in a very strange way, it was like destiny for me. Like Japan was definitely part of my destiny. I don't know how that happened, but I can just honestly say that it was just part of my destiny.
Yes. I love to hear you use that word. I think it's really important to see life in that way, that there are things that are happening that are sort of meant for you, and the kind of feeling that you're on the right path. You recently launched a new artist residency in Hamaya, where you were quarantined for some time during the height of the COVID pandemic. Will you share how this creative endeavor came to life, and what are the goals that you wish to achieve with this residency program?
Sure. So in 2017, I was given the opportunity to curate a show in Dubai. And so my wife, knowing that I was going to go to Dubai for the show, just basically said, there's no way you're going to Dubai without me. We did that. And then when we came back home, we had already had, because that trip to Dubai was work, right? But we already had our annual trip to Japan planned for the following month. And so I have a teenage son from, a prior relationship. And by this time next year, I'm going to have a son in college.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I can't even believe it. So he and I, and well, all of us, we all went to Japan that June. And during that trip, I was like, whoa, well, art has opened up so many doors for me. Look at me. This kid from Bed-Stuy who dreamed about going to Japan is now taking back-to-back trips to Dubai and Tokyo. Like, that's crazy, right? With family in tow. And all because of art. It occurred to me when we got to Japan on that trip that I was in a position to give those kinds of experiences and opportunities to other people, and that I should not take for granted the access that I have to these places. And so it immediately clicked that I should create a residency in Japan. Hayama is a small town on the coast, Pacific coast in Japan, about an hour and a half or so from Tokyo. Depending on how you travel, it's where my wife is born, and also happens to be the place where the imperial villa, so Japan's emperor's families had a villa there since like 1894. Side note, a bit of trivia, I happened to encounter Japan's emperor on the beach.
No way.
Yeah, which is kind of like So my wife and I and the kids were walking on the beach in Hayama in 2017. We know we're walking near the Imperial Villa. It's a well-known place. It's surrounded by tall walls and barbed wire, like it's as any Imperial Villa would be. We hung around for a bit, and of course you can't take photos and you can't approach. I mean, that's not allowed. So we just stood in one spot, and lo and behold, the Emperor and his wife take a stroll on the beach, which to me was like, oh wow, I felt like, oh, that's like seeing a president. But no, it's not really. I mean, like some people in Japan, they go their whole lives and they never see the Emperor. That was special.
Right.
So during that trip, I was like, this place is magical. And so in the back of my mind, I had this idea for the residency. I did not do anything for planning. It was just an idea. 3 years go by and I find myself stuck in Japan this year because of the pandemic. And it was during that time that I said, okay, I'm never going to have this opportunity again, where I have 3 months in Japan, guilt-free, because I can't leave. I decided I was going to use my time to pull all of the pieces of the puzzle for this residency together. I formed a selection committee made up of 6 people that I highly respect in the art world, who work in various capacities. People like James Bartlett, who has a new venture called Open Art, and he was the executive director of MoAD, a museum in Brooklyn for several years.
Amazing.
Amanda Colson, who was the co-founder of the Volta Art Fair, who now runs the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas. She's on the selection committee. I won't go through everyone's name, and also Sunny Raybar, who is the co-founder of the Third Line Gallery in Dubai, is also on my selection committee. So I reached out to 6 people during that trip that I, had a great relationships with, a history with. I told them my idea, and without fail, every single one of them said yes. So I launched the website. I put the selection committee together. I created marketing materials. I collaborated with Koki Arts, the gallery in Tokyo, and said, will you give my artists in residence their first show in Japan during the residency? And he said, absolutely. So all of those pieces of the puzzle came together during this trip in Japan. That's why I'm talking about opportunity. I could have just sat there and been stressed out about all the stuff I was watching on NBC Nightly News. And I had to stop watching NBC Nightly News about it because it was really depressing. And I just channeled all of that energy into a new project.
People have been asking me, so how have you been during quarantine? That was a question that I was getting. Now I don't get that question anymore. We've all talked, everyone's caught up. But there was a period where I was super sad, super depressed. And I think it was with the sparking of the George Floyd murder that got me kind of feeling not so good. And I started just drawing. I went out, I got the little bit of tools that I could find because things weren't open, right? I couldn't go, Pearl Paint doesn't exist anymore in New York City. If you're going to buy art supplies, you're going to Blick. Blick wasn't open. Nothing was really open, only essential places. So I just went to small places in the city that were open. I bought pens and markers and I just started drawing and doing different things. Even this idea for my podcast really came out of wanting to respond to what was happening in a way that I felt would be meaningful, impactful, but also align with the other stuff that I'm interested in. So it wouldn't be too much of a break from what I'm already doing, but it really came out of all of this. It wasn't planned that I had 6 months ago. It's not something that I thought about before, talking to artists, starting a podcast. I didn't really have this idea before. So not in this way specifically. So I think you talking about opportunity is such a good point. This is an incredible period of opportunity, one that may never come back in our lifetime. I'm sure it won't in the same way.
It won't come back in the same way. I mean, unfortunately, there will be other disasters and we will, if we're lucky enough, live through them. That is all but guaranteed. However, this particular disaster that we're still going through, it's so unique. So for me, being 47 and this being the first time in my life I've experienced anything even remotely like this. There isn't even anything else that I can compare it to, right? It's not like anything. And so with that said, the opportunities and the challenges are unique in terms of people who are able to continue to have some form of an income through this and keep working. Never before have you been able to create your schedule and get to that to-do list the way you've been able to get to that to-do list in the past 6 months. Because there are no excuses, right? You don't have to commute. You're saving hours every day. There's so many things you could do. So if you don't take advantage of this time now, when will you? There's an old saying, I don't even know who said it, the actual phrase is adversity introduces a man to himself, but forget about gender. Adversity introduces a person to themselves. And I think that the adversity we're dealing with right now is an opportunity for people to perhaps reintroduce themselves to themselves, to say, who am I? Now that I have the space to answer that question, am I living the life that I want to be living? And if I can't do it now, will I be doing it on the other side of this? This is what this time is about, right? Asking and answering those kinds of questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. It's been a very transformative period for me, not only professionally in having new sparks of ideas and new deep periods of inspiration, but it's also been a transformative period personally where I've realized how little I need in order to live a meaningful life for myself. I can't speak for others, but for me, it was a time of reckoning. Things weren't open. I wasn't able to access things in the same way. I spent a lot of time by myself, and in those moments of being alone and reflecting, I was able to take completely uninterrupted time and really reflect on my own life, my existence, my world, the world that I'm building for myself through the decisions that I make, the actions that I choose to take, the people that I choose to call my community and my friends and my family. And it also sort of gave me the space to dream and to imagine and to think really big. And I've always been someone who's had an active imagination and an overactive mind. But how often do you get uninterrupted days on end to reflect on your life, to consider different ideas and options, and be completely take a complete break from your day-to-day grind, the day-to-day hustle of just making it happen, of staying above water if that's where you are in your life, or of thriving in your business and in your entrepreneurship, depending on where you are in your professional world. All of those different things were so deeply impacted by the COVID pandemic, by this deep period of a shutdown and of a potential reset, which is what I'm, in my overwhelming and consistent themes and ideas of optimism, I'm looking at this period as an incredible opportunity, similar to what you have described here also. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. 100% feel the same for sure.
No, it's absolutely true. How committed are you to finding ways to change your life? And and I don't say this as someone who has achieved everything that I've set out to achieve. I still have a lot of unfinished business, lots of unfinished business, and things that I need to improve upon. What I do know that if you look back on a year of your life and you are still doing the same things that contributed to the problems that you had coming into the year, you're still doing those things as the year ends and you're entering another year, you're not being honest with yourself about your life. And it's not being judgmental.
Right.
What I'm trying to say is I was contributing to my own problems for years. And it wasn't until I realized that I started to be able to solve my problem.
Step one, right? It's like identifying a problem, seeing that it actually even exists is step one.
Right. Like they say, if you're in a hole, stop digging.
Yeah, like take a second and assess assess where you are. I wanted to go back to the residencies and talk a little bit about that. Why do you think residencies are important to you, but also for artists? I know that this may be obvious to some, but I know that a lot of my listeners do not come from an art background, and I'd love to share more information on how and why residencies can be so impactful for a young artist's career.
Sure. Generally, a residency is an opportunity for an artist to travel to another place and spend time there and make work. However, like most things, people have created their own versions of that. For me, I wasn't going to launch a residency that was going to follow any of those rules. What I wanted to do was to create a platform for an artist to have a life-changing experience, not just because they're going to be in a place that might be as far-flung for them as Japan. I mean, I'm assuming that the people who get selected for the residency over years, will mostly be people who are not from Japan. I mean, it's open to any artist can apply. But for me, the goal was to do something different. So Hayama Artist Residency is an opportunity for an artist to go to Japan. They have a place to stay. They are not required to make work while they're at the residency. The exhibition that they will be part of during the residency will include work that they've already created. So that work will be shipped in before they even arrive. They'll be part of the installation of the show at Koki Arts. There'll be an opening. They'll spend time exploring Hayama. They'll spend time, with themselves, with the other artists in residence to have the space to sort of think about big ideas. They'll spend time with me. I'll be there, helping them kind of navigate the place, but they'll have a lot of time on their own to do whatever they want to do. They'll get a free round trip flight to Japan. They'll receive a stipend of, $200 US a week while they're there. Of course, they should bring some of their own money. They also will receive money while they're there. They'll receive written feedback on their application. Even if you're not selected for the residency, simply by applying, you will receive written feedback on your application, which is incredibly valuable. And, there's an application fee of $95. Some people say, oh, that sounds like a lot. Some people say, for all you're offering, that sounds like a bargain. I don't know if it's a bargain. I don't know if it's a lot, but I've already had many people apply, and there are literally hundreds of people who have started their application. So there's a lot of interest, and I'm very excited about it. And it is a way for me to give something back to the art world that has given so much to me, and it'll grow into other things. And I'm very, very enthusiastic about it.
I'm so happy to see it take shape, and I'm really curious to see how things will build as time moves on, especially during this period. But also once the pandemic has kind of leveled out, I'd love to see how it continues to grow and develop. So I just want to say congratulations. It's amazing, and I look forward to watching it grow.
Thank you very much.
I had the pleasure of having Larry Osei-Mensah on the show as a guest, and I know you guys have both worked together before. I wanted to ask, how did your professional relationship come about?
So what's interesting about my professional relationship with Larry Osei-Mensah is that I remember going to a show in Chelsea, and Larry had curated an artist named Hugo McLeod into that show. And I thought, his selections on the work were great. And we just got to talking about things that we might want to do with one another. And we ended up curating a show in Chelsea back in 2012, I want to say. And that show was the beginning of what will become years of collaboration. But, Larry and I have, we've adopted this policy of collaboration and, uplifting one another at every opportunity. There's never been competition, and we continue to collaborate, we continue to communicate. And I just want that to be like a living example to other people in the art world that you need collaborators and you need partnerships with people in order to make things grow.
As you continue to work on new projects and meet new people, what are some of the most important things to you in cultivating and maintaining professional relationships?
I pride myself on being someone who is really good at staying in touch with people. Part of that probably has to do with my background in business, running an agency. Client relations is something that I was very big on. Professional relationships and maintaining them is something that I'm very, very big on, and I try to help other people understand the importance of that. Checking in with people on a regular basis, checking in with people not just when you need something, but maybe when they need something, or maybe there is no need, and it's just a matter of like making sure that you keep that connection going. I think that professionalism in the art world is something that can never be overstated. I think that if you are making a living as an artist or as a curator or any other arts professional, you need to understand that you are your own business and you have to behave accordingly. I put a high premium on people who are able to, stay in communication and stick to their word. My growth as a curator happened because I didn't know that I couldn't do it. So, like most things in my life, I start doing something, and then it's only later I realized how much of a challenge it should have been or could have been. But I just try to get things done.
Right. Adding to that question, what are some words of wisdom you would impart to young artists in building meaningful professional relationships in their careers?
Humility is real. It's one of those things that gets talked about a lot, but you have to be sincere about your humility, because there's always going to be a time when you need help, and people don't like helping people who didn't show any humility when they were on top or when they were doing well. So being humble is critical. Being intellectually curious is really important. And by that, I mean accepting the limitations of what you know and realizing that people that have come before you have a skill set and a knowledge set that you might not have, and being willing to learn, constantly learn, is critically important. Setting goals that are sufficiently high so that even if you don't achieve them, you've already outpaced what you thought you could have done. Don't set goals that are easy to achieve. There's no point in that. You got to set goals that are really challenging, really, really challenging. And then also having a long-term view on things and realizing that, we're living in the moment. The only thing you ever have is the moment you're living in. That's a fact. But there's a future that you have to work towards, right? And if you want to get to that future, that bright future, you got to know what it is. You got to shape it. You have to shape it. That's the closest thing to magic most of us will ever achieve, is having an idea, having a goal, and then actually achieving it. In many ways, that's magic, right? And in many ways, that's the closest we'll ever come to being a genius, is having an idea and seeing it through to reality.
What are some of the things you're most excited about when you think about the future in the art world, but also perhaps in your professional life?
Well, I'm really excited about every project that I'm working on right now. I mean, project/company. I mean, Art World Conference was a seed of an idea a couple of years ago, and it's grown into something that is, I like to say, has had a positive impact on hundreds of people directly. Maybe thousands perhaps, but certainly hundreds of people directly and maybe thousands of people indirectly. And I'm excited about the next phase. I mean, we're dealing with this inability to have large in-person gatherings. And so now we're doing everything online, and that's exciting. The Hayama Artist Residency is, again, one of those things where I look back and I'm like, wow, a year ago, I was nowhere with this thing. And now it's like out there in the world and being talked about and written about in publications and what have you. It's exciting,
Absolutely.
And then I'm working on some exhibitions, one of which is the first solo museum exhibition of a Johannesburg-based artist named Billy Zingawa. So I'm curating Billy's first museum show in the United States, and that's going to open next year. And we've already lined up 2 more museums, so it's going to be a 3-museum show. So I'm over the moon about that. Because again, it was one of those things where you have a conversation with someone and you're like, you know what, let's do this. Let's make this happen. And then you make it happen. That's amazing.
Absolutely. It first exists in your mind, but the process of getting it from your mind to something real is, as you said earlier, that's that magical space, right?
Yeah. And, I'm willing to put in the blood, sweat, and tears for my dreams, because I know that's what it requires.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. And I look forward to, putting our episode out there. And I also would love to stay in touch with you, and just keep that communication open for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's do that. I mean, I'm always interested in building new relationships and exploring new collaborations and possibilities. So, let's definitely do that, and let's see, what might be on the horizon.
Okay. That sounds great. I look forward to it.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
You're welcome.
That's our episode with Dexter Wimberly. I want to give a big shout out and thank you to Dexter for the time. Learn more about Art World Conference and all the incredible work he and his team are doing to facilitate change and empower artists throughout the world through education, self-empowerment, and financial growth. More details will be in the description box of this podcast, so check it out. And if you haven't already signed up for their virtual programming, it's this weekend, October 16th and 17th.
Well, there you have it, folks. It's a wrap. Check us out on our next episode as we continue to connect with artists, curators, and art professionals of color in our exploration of the African diaspora, including the allies who work to support and empower these artists and professionals through their dedication in the field. As always, stay motivated, stay inspired, and stay up. Peace and love, y'all. We out. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and catch us on our next episode. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time on Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, conversations on culture and current events with some of today's most exciting creative contemporaries.